are door-to-door in the dogleg. They touch, coming to the tri-oval down the line.
It's Richard Petty by a foot. Petty wins his 200th career NASCAR victory.
I'm going to finish up this year. I'm going to run every race there is next year. The deal is that it will be my last year next year.
From the very beginning, I felt Richard Petty was certainly going to be all the way at the top. You know, he really applied himself to the racing part of it. They made sure they had the best of equipment, but they made sure that they ran it the best it could be run. And to me, that was obvious. I looked for people to look up to. And from day one, I could look up to Richard Petty, and I could look up to the Petty operation.
Oh, I don't think there's no question about it. I think Richard Petty did for racing probably what you would say that Babe Ruth did for baseball.
Not only has he been a great competitor, you know, we've always been real good friends too, you know. And as far as I know, as long as I run with Richard and race with him, beat and bang with him and everything else, I don't reckon we've ever had a cross word against each other.
We were at Martinsville, and I was holding him up, I guess, and he bumped me and got me a little out of shape and got by. And to show you how clean he is, he moved over and motioned me back by the next lap.
The greatest incident I remember about racing with Richard Petty was in 1975. He had clearly the fastest car that day, but he split a radiator seam. The seam down the radiator split, and he could only run about 10 laps, and all the water would leave the engine. He'd have to go back in the pits and put more water in. He comes back out on the racetrack right in front of me with about 12 laps to go. He pulls up on the racetrack, and he literally said, "Come on." I mean, if you want to go get the guy, let's go. And all of a sudden, he's right there. There's 3 laps to go, and the old heart starts pumping because we are going to catch him. There's not going to be much time left. We are going to catch Pearson. We come off the second corner, and here this 21 car is David Pearson going down through the dirt. And I said, my God, that 21 car is spinning out. You never saw the 21 car in any kind of trouble. That 21 car is spinning out. I went all the way down the back straightaway, marveling the fact that the 21 car is in trouble. I got to the third corner and said, I just won the Daytona 500. But I mean, it was through Richard Petty's help that I was able to do that, because he got me to the point that David had to make a move. He clipped Gil Yarborough.
What did this guy do that everybody likes so well? And you have to think that, well, his character, his family, his background, the way he's projected himself through the years, and that's the way I look at it. A guy he don't build that kind of reputation overnight.
Richard's always been there. And he's not the type, he'll get right up with you and rub fenders, but he's gonna get his way to the front, you know, without creating any real havoc.
Well, certainly the 200th win was a milestone in auto racing, and having the President of the United States at that event was a major contribution to the sport. I doubt if any of us realized at the moment what it really meant to the sport of auto racing, and it had to be Richard Petty.
He and I were battling for the lead, and of course I was sitting right behind him, running second, and just knew I had him set up where just where I wanted him. And then caution flag came out, and I made a shot at him, but I didn't have him just like I wanted him. I would have had him the next lap, and I just didn't have enough momentum. I got by him, but I didn't have enough momentum to stay by him, and he beat me out by about a foot at the start-finish line. But that one probably stands out more, I guess. But Richard and I had a lot of good battles throughout the years, and good clean battles too. That's what it was all about.
He's run more races than anybody. He's won more races than anybody. So when he speaks to you and he tells you about something that he thinks you may ought to try to do differently or that you can improve upon, it's that knowledge. You know he has that knowledge. You know he has that experience. I think that's the difference.
When I came to North Carolina, that's where I wound up, at Kyle and Patty's house, and it took them about 3 months to get tired of me and send me on my way. And fortunately, Linda and Richard let me move in with them, and I wound up staying there for about 9 months, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And you know what was the best thing for me about it was everything that everyone said about Richard, and him being so great in the fans' eyes and the media's eyes, him being such a big part of this sport. When I got home at night and we sat down on the couch to watch TV, he was still the same person. I mean, he was as genuine and as good behind the doors of his house as he is in front of the camera or to the race fans. That was one of the neatest things for me to gain an understanding for.
We ran into each other one time, and after I'd been racing for about 3 or 4 years, and you know, it's a funny thing, I was sure it was his fault, but he straightened me right out afterwards that it was my fault. I didn't argue with him, but...
Richard's never really come up to me and given me a negative piece of advice. Richard is probably one of the most positive people I know in the sport when it comes to dealing with his competitors. Even after the year that he flipped on the front straightaway and then I ran into him running through all the debris, I made a tremendous contact with him and virtually was the one that hurt his leg. The next week at Richmond, he was able to come up to me and joke about it and say, you know, yeah, you know, bunged up my leg a little bit, but I'm going to be okay. And don't worry about it. He said, I'm all right. Don't let it bother you. That's just the kind of guy he is. He doesn't ever look at the negative or doesn't harp on the negative. He's such a positive person. It's just the right attitude to have in this sport when you're in a sport that negative is very easily overcomes your life.
Well, I think it goes back to being a Richard Petty fan is what he's done for this sport. You know, he's been a spokesman for so many years. He's been around it, he understands it. And just for anybody that can survive in this stuff and accomplish everything he's accomplished, you know, you got to look up to the guy.
When I come into Winston Cup race in 1980, you know, Richard won like $7 million and 7 championships. I said, nobody will ever beat that ever. You know, it's, times change though, and but Richard is the duly king of Winston Cup racing.
I don't think he'll be missed because he's not going anywhere. Richard Petty will still be here. He'll be here for forever, and the fans will love him just as much as a car owner as they have as a driver. Richard Petty, his light won't ever dim, I don't think.
He was a good boy. He done a few things that I found out about after he was married that I didn't know about when he was in school, but other than that, nothing mean. He used to race.
Well, I didn't like him at first. I mean, you know, he was somebody to go to the ball games with, and I really didn't think about it getting into anything serious because with him being older, I mean, you know, I thought, well, you know, this guy, he'll be here and gone, you know. Just one day out of the clear blue, he says, I'm ready to get married. He said, I think we better get married right now. And of course, you know, I never give it a thought. At that time, I thought, if he's ready to get married, I'm ready to get married.
We were just always competitive of, you know, racing our bicycles, our little wagons down the hills and things like that. And gosh, no, didn't have no idea in the world it was going to turn into this.
Since I was with the children, if they'd done something that needed attention, they needed to be disciplined right then I done it. I never said to them, well, in 2 days when your dad gets home, you are going to get it. Because he was home so seldom that I never wanted to threaten them with the fact that if he walked in the door, they would be scared to death of him. I wanted him to come home, and I wanted the time that he spent with them to be quality time.
Sometimes Mama at first would say, wait till your daddy gets home. You've had it, wait till your daddy gets home. And we would wait, and when Daddy would come home, he would give us a type of tea, you know, what you did wrong? Yes, sir. Don't do it again. Yes, sir, and that was it. So Mama found out when we were young that she would have to deal with it. So she did, he didn't. Never raised his voice, ever, never. Very calm, very quiet, just like he is. What you see is the way he is.
One instance was we were in Martinsville, Virginia. He won the race, and this was back, we had an old Chrysler, had power windows. And all day long, the kids say, up and down with these windows. Well, the race was over, and it was beginning to get dark, and the infield, there could not have been more than maybe 2 or 3 cars in the infield. And finally, here he comes to the car. He gets in, turns the key, and the battery is dead as a doornail. Well, he was not happy. We had to get somebody over to charge the battery, and we finally got home. But yeah, we waited. We spent a lot of time in the car waiting on him.
I can remember being 7 years old and sitting at North Wilkesboro when there's not another car in the infield except our station wagon with my mother and my 3 sisters, and my father sitting on a brick wall signing autographs to the last guy that comes down out of the stands. And, you know, at Martinsville and places like that, we'd be the last car to leave.
Sure, anytime you want to find Richard when a race was over, you just look for the crowd. He'd be right in the middle of it signing autographs.
I probably started going to races with the Petties in 1950 or 50, I know in 51, but back then we were kids in this community of level cross, and we all had bicycles. And if I come over here to play basketball or to play football, if we wanted to go to the movie, anything, before we could do it, we had to get his race car ready. And I would help, and then we could do our thing, or Lee would play basketball and football and stuff with us. But that's the way it all got started. And of course, back then, you know, they're stock cars today, but they were stock cars then, and they wasn't that much to do to them, but they were still race cars.
Talking about being afraid. Well, the first time he went to Daytona, of course, you know, he was in a convertible. And like now, I look back and I think, I would be petrified to think that he was in a car on that speedway with no top on it.
The one at Darlington in '70, I guess, was a pretty bad accident. I'm sure a lot of people seen it. And that was before the window nets and everything, it throwed his shoulder out of joint. And we got in the car with him to get him out, and he was hanging upside down, you know, all limp in there and everything. And the car was laying on its roof. And I thought he was gone then, you know. We unhooked the belts and tried to hold him, and he made a noise when he hit the roof, you know. So I knowed he was alive, and it wasn't long before he come to, and he was waving his foot at the fans when they took him to the hospital.
I can remember him having wrecks, I mean, like at Darlington and things like that when I knew it was bad. I knew he was in the hospital, but no, it never entered my mind until I was older that it was dangerous. And now, I mean, I just worry constantly when he's out there.
I will say that my life has never been dull. It has been a learning experience from day one, and I am so thankful that I've just been a part of his life. We loved each other, and we still love each other, and we've been together 32 years, so we, you know, at that time we felt like that was all that mattered, and that's how we still feel.
What kind of a person is Richard Petty? I could probably sit here and talk to you for hours upon hours on what kind of a person he is, you know. I could steal some quotes and say he's a, you know, a man of all seasons. He's the type of guy that, you know, when my kids went to school in the morning, I'd love to see Richard Petty behind the desk teaching my boys. And this guy is just unbelievable. I mean, the more you're around him, the more you learn about him. He's the type of guy that I would love to have running the White House right now, you know. He'd make a good politician. He's just, I couldn't say enough good things about Richard Petty. You know, you talk about nothing being indispensable, right? I think that Richard Petty is indispensable. That's my way of thinking about Richard Petty.
Richard, I think, is somebody that everybody admires, not only because it's hard to do what he's done, won all the time, all the races he's won, but also the kind of person he is. I mean, it just goes before him, and that's the thing that I mean, if you want your son to kind of have a hero, I think Richard Petty would be a good one to be your hero.
Yeah, I just have so much respect for Richard Petty, period. I met Richard Petty a long time ago when I was a little kid, and yeah, I just always thought that if, when I grew up and became a man, I wanted to be just like Richard Petty. I wanted to have the same values and be the same type of person he was, because, he's always was a kind individual, and he really stood for something. And it's good to see people who are so successful and they don't change as a person. And I always said if I was ever that successful, I wanted to be, the same type of person.
And I used to think, just watched him through the career, and as this guy grew in stature and really become the kind of guy that everybody would like to have as a hero. I mean, he's the kind of guy that always was nice and friendly to me as a little kid. I can remember as a little bitty kid, first time I ever met Richard Petty, having him say, "Come on, kid, let's go get a hot dog."
I know the phone number down there, and 100 times in the last 25 years I've called down, "Richard, this guy's really sick. It would really help him as your fan." And Richard Petty comes through 100% of the time, and he pays for the stamps.
I think of his crash at Pocono where he broke his neck and went right back into the race car again with a broken neck. I think of his crash at Darlington where he literally knocked the wall down and got right back into the race car. His tremendous crash at Daytona where after all the end-over-end gyrations he was nailed so hard by Brett Bodine. I think anybody else would have developed an awesome terror of racing. But Richard never did. Richard was always able to get back into the car again with a smile on, with a wave for his fans, and I think that demonstrated incredible courage.
Steve Wade, who's my best friend on the circuit, and I were hunting Richard to see how he was going to be, if he was going to be able to race, and we couldn't find him. And we asked Jimmy Martin, who's an associate of Richard, "Where's Richard?" And he said, "Well, he's in a van out in the parking lot." I said, "What's he doing in a van out in the parking lot?" He said, "Well, he's got a big cast on his foot, and he's out there driving around in the parking lot at the Richmond Fairgrounds, practicing braking with that cast." So we went out there, kept looking for a van circling around, making a lot of stops, and finally here came Richard by, and we waved him down. He was hurting, and he was concentrating on seeing if he could drive the race car, but he stopped, gave us a terrific interview as usual.
I think the first encounter I ever had was just meeting, how cordial he was around the garage area. He seemed to kind of want to know what was going on. He seemed like he'd come around and meet all the drivers at that particular time. And to me, that was kind of extraordinary for a lot of the drivers because they were always kind of doing their own thing. Because I know when I first started running, the NASCAR stuff is, he came over and talked to us and this, that, and the other, and, a lot of the other drivers would.
I met Richard 34 years ago, and Richard Petty still wears the same size helmet today that he did 34 years ago.
I think what would be happening in Richard's case, and I think in my own case, is that we came up through some pretty tough times, and we appreciate the opportunities that our individual sports have given us, and you get those opportunities through the fans and through their appreciation of the sport and of our participation in that sport. So, and I think that in my case, you can't ever repay them, and I think that that's probably Richard's feeling too. For their support through the years and making my sport possible as racing. Without the fans, you really don't have a sport.
There's no question that stock car racing is as successful as it is today because of Richard Petty. He pioneered the openness that drivers have to the fans. You find that only in stock car racing. You do not find it in other forms of the sport. Richard Petty sells more tickets today than Barney Oldfield sold. I mean, Richard Petty is the world's greatest auto race ticket seller.
Richard had the bulk of the fans on his side, he really did, because they could come through the pits or he'd go through the grandstand and sign autographs, and he has always been very nice to everybody.
Well, I can tell you, I saw him many times when he was hurt. He and I think Bobby Allison, I said to Bobby one time, I'm amazed Richard just sat up on the fender in Nashville one night until the last person left the stadium. And, you know, that's a real tribute, signing autographs. And a lot of the drivers don't understand it's okay to do it when you're at your prime, but sometimes when you have a bad day, you want to go home, but Richard was always there.
And this kid was hanging on the fence at North Wilkesboro Speedway. Kept yelling for Richard to come over and talk to him. Finally, when he got a break, Richard went over and spent some time and talked to him for several minutes, 10 minutes, you know, which is a lot of time for Richard Petty to give a single individual. And turns out it was Brad Daugherty.
I met him at a relatively young age, and now when I see him again, he's the same exact person. And when I think of someone that kids ought to try to emulate and try to be like, Richard Petty always pops into my mind. I think he's just the perfect role model.
And that is why Brad Daugherty has it written in his contract with Cleveland Cavaliers that he'll wear number 43 throughout his pro basketball career.
I always felt like that our sport, stock car racing, was as good as any sport. I felt like that we were as good as football, baseball, basketball, all the rest of the ball sports. I think we are as good. Our people are as good, and the sport is as exciting. And I think through Richard Petty's help, we have let a few million people know that. And I think that he's let more million people know it than anybody else.
Well, I'm a competitor, and I'm an athlete. And numbers are important to me. And when I look at 200 wins and 7 championships, and yeah, I'm guilty of the same thing everybody else is, well, that's not in the modern era. In the modern era, he hadn't done this. In the modern era, he hadn't done that. But his longevity, one of the things that I've always been big on is consistency. Week in, week out, year in, year out. That's the kind of thing that makes a champion. And that's the kind of thing that I admire about Richard.
Brett Bodine's a Richard Petty fan for everything that he's done in the sport, from taking the time for the little kids that want to see him after the race is over and he's had a bad day, to being a friend to all his competitors, whether they might have gave him a problem that day or not. He's always treated you fair when it's over with and respected you for what you thought.
Who couldn't be a Richard Petty fan? Richard Petty is the guy that's won all the races. He's the guy with all the charm. He's the guy that says the right thing at the right time, but he doesn't put it on. It's real. It's what's on his mind. And he loves what he's doing. I love automobile racing. How could you not like Richard Petty? Sure, I'm a Richard Petty fan. Darn right I am.
Richard Petty has become a name that is absolutely synonymous with motorsport. And not only has become synonymous, I mean, lots of people become very, very well known in their particular sport, like a Dan Marino, Roger Staubach, but they don't last long, you know, they just play for a few years, 3 years, 5 years maybe 10. But I mean, Richard's been absolutely at the top for 30 odd years. I mean, he hasn't won a race for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years. And yet, he has an incredible rooting section in the crowd, and everywhere you go, everybody's got pictures of Richard Petty in the back of their campers and on the back of their cars and old number 43. And I guess it won't stop. I think it'll carry on. I mean, he'll be retired 10 years before people realize he's gone.
The thing about Richard Petty that's Alabama has always been real conscious of image, how we treat our fans. Our fans are the most important people to us. They've given us this wonderful opportunity that a bunch of simply raised boys that really had nothing but music and a lot of desire. We achieved a lot of things, and we appreciate those fans. And one of the things that we've always heard about Richard Petty and know about Richard Petty is his sincere care about the fans. And he's aware of them, and he cares about them, and that's, besides winning the races, he's won a lot of hearts, and he's won a lot of admiration from me, and I'm sure literally millions of people all across the world because of his. There's more to Richard than a great race car driver. Well, I think the song says part of it. It says he's the best that's ever been, and I think he's the best that ever will be. And Richard's done it all. He's done it very well, and he will continue to do all that very well. He'll continue to be my hero.
1, 2, 3.
Don't miss your chance to see the king as you've never seen him before in Richard Petty, the legend.
This is it, folks. Come along for the ride.
From the early days of Lee Petty to Richard's last race, this exclusive 2-volume documentary covers it all. Order your set today for just $43 by calling 1-800-488-3883 or write Richard Petty Video, 904 North Broadway, Lexington, Kentucky, 40505.